We are now able to assert the reality, or at least the connection to reality, that these video game sequences expose their audience to. But the other half of understanding Final Fantasy is the fantasy of it. Even characters within these games take time to experience their own fantasy. Final Fantasy IX's opening sequence, a massively popular annual play, serves as a cover-up for the kidnapping of the princess. The princess, who only wishes for freedom from the expectations of royalty, runs from Steiner, who wants to protect her, Zidane, who wants to flirt with her, and the rest of Tantalus, who want to kidnap her. They all end up on stage accidentally during the play, blurring the lines between what is part of the play and what is improvised, what is real and what is fantasy. Bertolt Brecht noted a tendency for this type of self-awareness in theater in his essay, Alienation Effects in Chinese Acting. He identifies the alienation effect as a creation of the actor who exposes their art. He says, the artist's job is to appear strange and even surprising to the audience. He achieves this by looking strangely at himself and his work. Everyday things are thereby raised above the level of obvious and automatic. End quote. The purpose of creating this vulnerability in their art is to invite criticism for the issues raised and for the art itself. Brecht found that this resulted mainly from the deviation from immersion. While being emotionally attached or empathetic to a character often creates strong feelings, the alienation effect can be just as strong. Brecht details one scene where a Chinese actor screams silently. Though we are shown an emotion through indirect gestures, the audience can still imagine what it would feel like to suppress one's own involuntary action. The performer then becomes an observer of itself, and the observer in the audience relates, as they are also an observer. Immersion is a large component of the fantasy genre, but there are still some aspects of this series that, whether intentional or not, break that immersion. The beginning of Final Fantasy VIII certainly immerses the player in its setting of Balamb Garden. The opening cinematic depicts one of the first arguably realistic sword fights in a video game, making it a symbol of technological progress in the industry. Soon after, the player progresses to the Seed Field exam, which is introduced by Headmaster Cid. He says, "You will be proceeding to a real battlefield. Obviously, the battles are for real. Life and death, victory and defeat, honor and disgrace. Each of these go hand in hand." Once again, binaries are introduced here, suggesting character development. But the repetition of defining a real battle as real gives an irony to the next few hours of the game. They are, of course, fake to the player and only an exam for the characters. The game then continues to pull back and forth between immersing and alerting the player. The landing at Dalit cinematic begins with a formation of fighter planes soaring over the background of a full moon. Then ripples on the water form from the fleet of ships, revealing that the planes were seen through a reflection. The then astonishing graphics, along with the unique and intense soundtrack, appropriately named The Landing, create a massive scene that draws the player into the conflict. However, briefly during the cinematic, Squall holds up a transparent sheet over a printed picture of the distant town of Dalit. The markings on the sheet resemble strategical instructions and objectives that were devised beforehand. The game filters our screen with yet another layer or two of mediation and calls attention to the process of analyzing or planning this series of actions. The ships and planes all needed communication to be synchronized and had prescribed orders for the mission. All this staging perhaps originated in a room, at a screen surrounded by invested participants, not too different from the situation of the development of this project, the game itself, and the anticipating onlookers who consume the finished product. Similarly, in the opening of Final Fantasy VII, The cinematic breaks previous video game barriers by seamlessly transitioning from a full-motion video of space to a flower girl, to a full view of the city of Midgar, then shifting to the actual gameplay graphics at the scene of the rebel terrorist organization Avalanche, beginning their attack on the oppressive Shinra company. The soundtrack transitions with the repurposing of the sound of the train letting off steam as the tempo of the next piece. These elements once again facilitate the audience's connection to the scene, but they also later become the reason for their disconnect. Due to a desire to maximize their potential output, Square was unable to develop all gameplay to the same quality as the full motion video cinematics. As a result, the characters that the players become accustomed to during the majority of the game will completely change models during these heightened moments in the story. While the player can still recognize who is who, they become acutely aware during these cinematics that they are no longer in control, and the differences in these character models undergo more scrutiny from the attentive audience. The inverse of this issue is created when the player chooses to take the staircase at Shinra headquarters. Barrett complains about the length of the stairs, and the player is not exactly sure when the stairs will end because there appears no difference between each level. Other than a few items on the floor and some dialogue between the party members, each scene looks identical to the last. Similarly, in a play, the stage would not change to illustrate this. It would just be implied or described by the action of closing and reopening the curtains, or a fade to and from black for the video game. As many of these identical scenes progress, Barrett gets irritated and impatient, to which the following dialogue occurs. Tifa says, "Barrett, pull it together." He replies, "Well, all I know is I'm just flesh and blood. Don't treat me like I'm some ex-member of Soldier or something." Tifa replies, "What about me? I'm human too." The fact that Cloud, an ex-soldier, witnesses this argument questions his humanity. As we learn, Soldier is a class of genetically enhanced troops with superhuman strength. Not once during the stairwell ascent does Cloud, unlike Tifa and Barrett, seem tired or agitated. The player as well is not tired, but excited by the prospect of the end of the stairs, and as Cloud observes this conflict, so does the player share in this omniscience. Later on in the Shinra building, Professor Hojo attempts to mate Eris with Red 13, comparing the two completely different species. Both the ancients and the feline species he calls animals, to which Tifa exclaims that Eris is a human being. However, when Red 13 is asked, he says, "Hojo has named me Red 13, a name with no meaning whatsoever to me. Call me whatever you wish." Barrett then asks, "What are you?" Red 13 replies, "An informed question, but difficult to answer. I am what you see." Due to philosophical inquiry and programmed interactivity, we are presented with perhaps the greatest fantasy. The suggestion that we may not be human. Just as Barrett is human insofar as he is only connected to a mechanical arm, and Cloud is human insofar as he is genetically enhanced, we are humans immersed in a technological and fantastical world. But our lives, unfortunately, will never be as interesting as these fictions. As earlier explained with the Final Fantasy VIII character Nita, most of us will not change the world. During the train hijacking sequence in Timber, we are shown the thoughts of one of President Deling's guards. He thinks about how he should do his job or role, despite its questionable morality, so he can be paid. Something we all must consider in supporting ourselves. We learn that this guard is trying to get married, but can't afford it if President Deling keeps cutting his wages. This provides another binary to the growing seed members. He is not a distinguishable character, illustrated by his reused character model for many of the other soldiers. However, by attributing this extra layer of story to a seemingly indistinguishable character, Square places an unusual emphasis. They create a complex conflict, essentially, which is, at its simplest form, the interaction of two conflicts. For example, Headmaster Cid married Sorceress Adea, and Cid is the leader of the Seed, who must fight Sorceress Adea. The interaction of these two conflicts creates the bigger conflict of whether he should carry out the assassination of his own wife or fail his mission to save his wife. Cid still fulfills his role as headmaster of the garden by carrying out the order, but there is hesitation because of his other role as husband. By creating this kind of conflict for the seemingly inconsequential Galbadian soldier, it is suggested that anyone can be the protagonist of their own story, even though it is not a major role in the overall story. In order to sustain ourselves, we are forced to fulfill many unsatisfactory roles. This is vividly stated in Final Fantasy VII after the Mako reactor bombing, when a guard tells Cloud, "I got the miserable job of keeping scum like you from trying to sneak in here." Also, despite the controversy surrounding the Shinra Company's use of Mako reactors, there are still many people willing to be employed there. Cloud had earlier discussed this issue with Barrett. He says, "No one lives in the slums because they want to which Barrett replies, "It's like this train. It can't run anywhere except where its rails take it." It is these moments of diversion that brighten our dimly routine lives. Fantasy has the same purpose as described by Samuel Coleridge in his Biographia Literaria as to give the charm of novelty to things of every day, and to excite a feeling analogous to the supernatural, by awakening the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and directing it to the loveliness and the wonders of the world before us, an inexhaustible treasure, but for which, in consequence of the film of familiarity and selfish solicitude, we have eyes, yet see not, ears that hear not, and hearts that neither feel nor understand. Final Fantasy continually raises these essential and timeless issues. Unsurprisingly, why there are so many nostalgic fans. It reminds us of a time when we were innocent, like two boys in Final Fantasy X who say they want to be an Albed and a Blitzball when they grow up. But also when Grav, a rival Blitzball player, says, "Even kids can play, boys," we are reminded that no one is too old to play games, to appreciate art. And by promoting an awareness of binary oppositions, there is also an awareness for others, whether through sympathy, maturity, or collectivity, that simultaneously identifies and immerses ourselves in the fantastical elements of our world, one that does not end when we have been defeated or when the credits roll.